Good morning and happy Makara Sankranti to all the viewers of Taxsutra. And I would thank Taxsutra for asking me to share my thought process on Budget 2022. The amendments that are expected, amendments that are not expected. When it comes to amendments that are expected, I would think that in section 147, it's quite likely that there is going to be an amendment to allow the revenue to continue with the older regime of reassessment. And this amendment may be found necessary to undo the decision of Allahabad High Court and Delhi High Court, which have held that post 1/4/2021, the new regime alone will operate and there is nothing to permit the old regime to continue. Then in the scheme of phaseless assessment, considering the way the honorable high courts across the country are, quashing the phaseless assessment orders, most of which would have been passed without providing a personal hearing, without, giving a proper draft assessment order. And any procedure which is prescribed, if not followed, then 144B9 would render this phaseless assessment order non-est and null and void. So, in the course of our arguments in the court, the revenue councils have expressed that 144B9 could be troubling them to defend the orders. So there could be an amendment to 144B9 to reduce or, tone it down, the effect of it. Then when it comes to the provisions of 45(4), which will deal with the retirement of a partner, in terms of a sum of money or a capital asset that is given to him in the scheme of reassessment, I would think that in the formula which is given under 45(4), which will allow the capital balance to be reduced, may be amended for the reason that there is some sort of anomaly there, in as much as if the payment is spread over more than 1 year, the same amount of capital is allowed to be reduced. This could result in revenue loss. And as you are aware, in engineering analysis case, the decision on sale of copy of computer software is dealt with. In this regard, you could expect an amendment in section 916 to provide that the consideration for transfer of copy of computer program may be treated as royalty, but as you would know, this may not trouble the DTA countries. It will only help revenue in the case of non-DTA countries, or in the case of DTA countries where the benefit of DTA is denied by invoking, the PPT test or limitation of benefit test of MLI, or the domestic guard test, in which case, a taxpayer is stuck to the domestic tax law. Therefore, the definition of royalty, as may be amended, may, trouble him. And considering significant progress that has been happening in the scheme of the tax on digital economy in terms of Pillar 1, Pillar 2, and the draft rules being out on Pillar 2, it's quite unlikely that changes in the scheme of significant economic presence or equalization levy would take place now, because as we understand, equalization levy is only a temporary measure. And very temporarily, the government may not be very keen on even expanding the equalization levy. So I would think that they may not touch that. And when it comes to some of the amendments which have to necessarily take place, could be one in the scheme of SEZ, SEZ, which started off with a lot of fanfare, has almost, subdued, in as much as no one is very keen on pursuing this, particularly from the direct tax front. And people think that, the legitimate expectation has not been met with in terms of amendment to the 115 JB explanation 6 or whatever, or, 115O, which was then prevalent. So therefore, it is expected that some amendments could be made in the scheme of SEZ on the line of International Financial Services Center. And I would think that from the investor's point of view, the tax on dividend in respect of dividend you get from units in SEZ will have to be significantly pruned, because otherwise, now that the dividend is to be charged to tax in the hands of the recipient, with the maximum surcharge of 15%, the tax rate on dividend could be as high as 35.88. When it comes to business trust, it is essential that they'll have to carry an amendment in section 242A to provide that the units of business trust, it is sufficient to hold them for 12 months to call them as long term. Otherwise, what is happening, as you would know, shares depending on listed or unlisted would have 24 months or 36 months, or 12 months or 24 months to call them as long term or short term. If you would exchange your shares in an SPV for the units of business trust, though it is called tax neutral, but then the units of the business trust will have to be held for 36 months, which could at times translate what is otherwise long-term gain into short-term gain, entailing a much higher tax. So this anomaly needs to be removed. And we have one another aspect of the very complex tax rate structure for a company. As you know, there are far too many rates. For a company, you have 15%, you have 22%, you will have 25%, you will have 30%. And when it comes to dividend, except in the case of the pass-through dividend in the hands of, like holder of a business trust, where he wouldn't have to pay tax on dividend when the SPV has not opted for 22% tax and 115 BAA. In rest of the cases, like a dividend is taxed at the max of 35.88%. So with the corporate tax varying from 15 to 30% and the dividend tax going at 35.88%, as compared to, like an individual who would at the highest pay tax at 42% on his business structure, LLP and the firm will pay at the rate of 35% effective tax. The far too many rates could create complexity, and I would not suggest that you will have to choose a particular form of business organization only keeping in mind the tax rate. So your form of business organization will have to be neutral to the tax rate. So these are, like some of the amendments which they'll have to carry out to bring the tax laws, in as conformity as possible with the global standard tax policy. And beyond this, I would not suggest them to do too much of tinkering in the tax laws, too many amendments, thinking, like that would increase the tax collection. Tax collection would not increase by carrying out amendments. Making far too many amendments would show weakness in the tax system. You would know that, in December, we have achieved almost 90% of the tax collection target, and the growth rate is 60%. As of December 2021. This has been achieved not because of amendments to tax laws. This has been achieved because of technological advancements in implementation of GST, which in turn has had its positive effect on direct tax collection as well. This itself shows that an efficient administration would expand the tax base, keeping the tax burden on each taxpayer moderate. So this is a high time, for them to concentrate more on administration, do a more effective phaseless assessment rather than making reckless assessment. And in this regard, a lot of efforts will have to go into convincing the tax administrators about, what Supreme Court said, that the duty of the tax collector is to administer tax laws with solicitude of revenue, with an inbuilt idea of fairness to the taxpayer. If this spirit is kept in mind in India, I don't think you need far too many amendments to carry out the tax collections targets achieved. So I would thank you and all the best to you and happy budget viewing. Thank you, one and all.